So now that we know what JavaScript is and where it runs, let's have a very brief overview of the JavaScript history so that you know how it evolved over time. In 1995, Netscape introduces LiveScript, which thereafter was renamed to JavaScript. Now, in 1996, Microsoft also released its own version of JavaScript in Internet Explorer. So same idea, generally same syntax, but also differences. So we already had an issue there. Back then, JavaScript also wasn't able to do a lot of things. It was mainly used for spammy things, for annoying overlays and pop-ups. But another problem was that you had to write very different scripts for different browsers. In late 1996, people saw that this fragmentation could be a problem, and therefore JavaScript, the language, was submitted to the ECMA committee to start standardization. This simply is an organization which was then responsible for standardizing JavaScript so that you have one standard which then could be implemented by multiple browsers. So then we had ongoing standardization efforts until 2005 roughly. And Microsoft didn't really join the party. Well, we know how Microsoft was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Ultimately, they supported the standardized JavaScript version. Still, there were differences, but we had a more common way of using JavaScript. Now, the efforts of standardization continued, and we had huge progress until 2011, I'd say. And Microsoft eventually joined forces and became part of the standardization process and of contributing to building that standard and adding new features. Because that's important. My timeline ends here. The development of JavaScript absolutely does not. I would say, especially since 2010-11, it really picked up. And it is under active development. It's evolving, new features are getting added, it's getting a better and better programming language. And whilst it was quite clunky around 2006 and 7, and despite standardization, every browser still did its own thing in some regards, we nowadays really have a uniform language with some small differences, but mainly one core language we can use in different browsers. Still, different browsers have their own features you can then use, but the core language is the same. And in the browser support module later in the course, I'll explain how you find out which differences we still have and how you work around them. But in the end, we now have a standardized language which is really great to use. We have that thanks to this ECMA International organization. Now, this organization in the end manages a language called ECMAScript. But ECMAScript and JavaScript actually have a strong relation. ECMAScript is the actual language which is evolved by the ECMA International organization. But ECMAScript is then implemented as JavaScript by browser vendors, so by the companies working on the browsers. So it is the most famous ECMAScript implementation. JavaScript is that most famous ECMAScript implementation. Others would be ActionScript or JScript, and you don't really need to know those. So JavaScript in the end is ECMAScript, we could say, and we have that organization that evolves ECMAScript, and with every new standard version, you could say, which is in the end then created and finalized, browser vendors take that and implement it into browsers. So ECMAScript itself isn't directly used, but browser vendors implement it into their JavaScript engines. Each browser comes with its own JavaScript engine though, and therefore it's each browser and the engine used by the browser which defines which exact features are supported. And actually browsers also sometimes implement certain features at an earlier point of time than they're really finalized in ECMAScript. So whilst discussions might still be going on over final implementation details, browser vendors could already go ahead and implement a certain feature in their engine already, so that you can already use next generation JavaScript code earlier in one browser than in the other. And that's also something I'll come back to in the browser support module, where you will learn how to use next-gen JavaScript when writing your code and still ensuring that it runs in all browsers. So ECMAScript is under active development, and browser vendors are contributing there as well, are shaping how JavaScript looks like and which new features we want there. And therefore, JavaScript is under active development, and therefore, it's a always evolving language. Now, in this course, you will learn JavaScript in the most modern way you can, using all the latest modern syntax. And this is important because in 2015, 2016, JavaScript saw a major overhaul, a brand new version, you could almost say, with a lot of important changes. And many tutorials and courses actually teach you the old JavaScript syntax, which still works, but which is not the most recent one and which has certain downsides. And then they later switch to the modern syntax. In this course, you will learn the most modern syntax right from the start. I will also show you the older one because you will still see it in other tutorials and code snippets, and you should be able to understand those. But we start with the modern one and we stick to the modern one. So you learn all the latest JavaScript in this course.